Welcome. I'm Harmony Slater, your host of the Finding Harmony podcast. Over the past 20 years, I've taught thousands of yoga teachers and students to explore the intersection between ancient wisdom and modern everyday life, using mind-body practices to heal, awaken, and manifest their dreams from the inside out. This podcast is a sanctuary for those feeling overwhelmed by life's challenges. Are you ready to jump in and discover how these challenges aren't actually in the way, but are the way to finding harmony? Let's invite the magic back in. Hi, welcome back to the Finding Harmony podcast. Today is part 2 of a 2-part series with Stephen Thomas. If you missed part 1, just head back 1 week and check out his story and all of his experience teaching yoga all over the world for the last 25 years. But today we are going to talk about another topic that I'm very passionate about, which is pranayama and breathwork. So let's just pause and take a deep breath. Yes. When Steve and I first started learning pranayama, there was barely any teachers, nobody was practicing, and you had to really search hard to find anyone who was teaching anything about pranayama or breathwork. It was considered very dangerous. Now, today, 25 years later, there's a breathwork instructor on every corner. There's breathwork teacher trainings springing up all over the place. You can get certified in a weekend. What is going on? We are looking into and exploring the topic of pranayama and breathwork and our experience and understanding of it and how it can help, but maybe also dysregulate your nervous system as well. So we're going to look at the shadow side and the light when it comes to using our breath for health, healing, and spiritual development. So let's dive right in. So you've been studying with David Frawley and have expanded your pranayama knowledge and practice. How are you working with students now when it comes to pranayama?
Yeah, I mean, it's a hot topic, isn't it? It is. Pranayama was something which was, for me, a very personal practice for a long time, actually. Mm-hmm. So I didn't teach it. And I didn't feel somehow the calling to teach it. Perhaps I wasn't confident. I felt like it was so subtle within me. Also, maybe I just loved it so much for myself, and I somehow wanted to just contain it or hold it. Yeah. And so then maybe really realistically, I think there's maybe 20 years of really deep practice in it, at about the 10-year mark, I remember making a conscious decision to teach it more. And I think when I started, so let's say 2014, when in Zurich, I started offering it more as weekly classes and little workshops, nothing very big, but consistently offering it like that. Yeah. And in the context of trainings that I was working on, I would always teach a little bit of pranayama, or not a little bit, I would kind of give them a big deep dive into it. And I loved it. Actually, I loved it very, very much. And I followed, again, this sort of 70-30 or 80-20 rule. Most of what I was sharing and teaching was out of the Kovalayananda lineage. And then I was very interested in what Bihar did a little bit, and a little bit the Himalayan tradition, a little bit the Tibetan tradition, although I don't have, to be, really honest, I don't have such a direct feed to that. So that's almost third-hand knowledge sometimes for me. I practice it a bit and I can feel it, and then I might share it, but say, this is not my lineage, but I can give you little examples of it. I think that's also important to note when you're teaching. Yeah. But I did that in a way where I felt good about it, and people seemed to respond to it quite well and enjoyed it. Some stayed with it and continued to learn with me. And others, the karma wasn't there, and they learned a bit, and maybe it just dropped away. but I feel like in those early days, I was almost alone in the field in this region, in Switzerland, in
Yeah.
this region. Weren't not many people teaching breath. And
No.
so I mean, I don't want that to sound the wrong way, but I mean, in this region, if you wanted to do a bit of breath work, I guess I was one of the people who
Hmm.
had some knowledge, and people would come and study with me, and I enjoyed that. And each year I feel
Yeah.
like I got a little bit better at it, and I learned a bit how to pass it on. And I also learned more and more each year a bit some of the challenges that people would have with it. And so I would try to research from an Ayurvedic perspective. I mean, why is someone struggling so much with this part? So
Yeah.
like I think you probably experienced that as well, that
Yeah.
the act of teaching forces the studentship deeply,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Totally.
I was completely humbled by it in the beginning because I realized, well, just what worked for me doesn't work for everybody. So it really drove me back into the quality of studentship, and I started to study deeply breath work from different traditions and perspectives, and the Ayurvedic weaving those two things together was really fascinating. So then I really kind of realized pranayama is happening on a spiritual level with the movement of prana towards Sushumna
Hmm.
only when the student really has enough steadiness and ease and stamina and enough
Hmm.
sattvic quality in the mind and body. Only then is it really becoming the possibility for this to happen.
Yeah.
Maybe that's wrong, but I had mostly that feeling. And
Hmm.
before that, it's primarily a therapeutic practice. It's, dealing with people's
Right.
vata and pitta and kapha and their
Yeah.
conditions and
Yeah.
preconditions. And then I saw the pranayama, that's just a healing tool to bring people to health
Yeah.
mentally and physically. And it works unbelievably. I mean, as you know,
Yeah.
it's
I
just
know.
it's unbelievable, right? You know that. And
Yeah.
so there was a big focus. I started to like, it's actually the spiritual ascent to the however you want to call it, the Sushumna, the
Yeah.
Kundalini, that's it can be there in
Yeah.
beautiful little droplets. But mostly what I was doing is just people were coming and saying, I'm stressed out, I'm burnt out, I have crazy anxiety, I'm
Yeah.
depressed, or I work too hard, or my mind will not sit still. I can't meditate. And so the third arm was just pranayama is this amazing door into meditation because
Yeah.
20 minutes, 30 minutes of proper pranayama and the person just slips into the dhyana, right? Or at least
Yeah.
they can concentrate, right?
Yeah. It's so good for concentrating the mind. Like when you're practicing
Unbelievable.
pranayama.
Yeah.
Wow.
Also because I think many people mistakenly try to meditate in this ekagrata, they try to just
Yeah.
focus the mind. And for the vata, that's hard. But if you give the mind and the vata a channel, if you, instead of
Hmm.
saying, I reduce the vata, let's channel the vata. Let's just channel
Yeah.
the wind into this channel. And the mind loves to move. So just say, okay, move
Yeah.
it down and up. And,
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
people would respond to that. It was beautiful.
I
And
think as Tori says, right, he would always say the mind and the breath are connected, and you can't
yes,
control the mind with the mind.
yeah,
But when you use the breath, it's the back door to the mind, to the vritti. So you can control your breath. So use
yeah,
the breath, and your mind will follow. When you control the breath, you control the mind.
yes, fully.
Yeah. Yeah. But like
So
you say,
like,
also, it's balancing the nervous system too, which is really about creating health and healing and moving the body into an optimum state where it can actually heal and restore and feel good again, which is really a therapeutic modality.
I find that's mostly what I'm
Yeah.
doing with
Yeah.
a lot of joy. I'm really enjoying that.
Yeah.
And then through that practice, then is coming some unexpectedly beautiful, bright, clear moments for people where actually things do harmonize and things become quite sattvic, or they become just nice and calm and steady. And then check, and there's like a little window or a door to come through all by itself.
Yeah.
And so that was the trajectory of that work. And, then just out of the COVID phase, what was fascinating was I always thought when I had to jump online that the more outer kosher work like asana, well, that will work. I can do that. And the subtle work, I don't know how I'm ever going to be able to do that online, like through a
Yeah.
camera. But in fact, it's almost became the opposite, that it's so
Yeah.
hard actually to teach asana
Yeah.
on the camera. But
Yeah.
since you're anyways mostly with the eyes closed and in a quiet space and in a little container, people would zoom in from their altar, from their home. I'd be here in the cave on my altar,
Yeah.
and we would just practice. And it was amazing what was happening. And so that part kind of grew. I started to teach quite a bit pranayama online. And the nice thing was that in this really subtle practice of pranayama, in the studio context, we would often finish, and then people are so, just so in. There's quite a deep pratyahara, naturally.
Yeah.
It's quite sattvic. And then the lights go on, and you have to go to the change room, and you got to get on the tram, and you got to go home.
Yeah.
And then people were saying, oh, it's amazing. I do it with you online. And then when I close the computer, I just go make some tea, and I kind of or I can just stay here at my little cushion or my altar.
Yeah.
So this was a nice surprise. It was really sweet how that worked, although I still love teaching this work mostly in person. As I said to you last night, it's still mostly in-person work, but the pranayama has worked quite nicely online for this, maybe for these little reasons. But then the breath work just exploded, right? We can talk about that.
Yeah.
I mean, we can just...
Yeah. I think COVID really brought an awareness to the fact that people weren't breathing properly, and dysfunctional breathing patterns were really creating a lot of issues in health and nervous system regulation. And this just became an entire area that online people were, all the wellness gurus and personal development gurus and yoga gurus and all the people with any kind of platform all of a sudden start talking about nervous system regulation and breath and breathing.
Fully. Everybody. It was overnight. It was unbelievable. I mean, even the past 2 years, unbelievable what's happened.
Yeah, I know.
Everybody
and I was like, wow, we've been talking about this for 20 years. Amazing.
I know, it's incredible, isn't it? But it's beautiful in a way.
Yeah.
I always think, the vidya, like any vidya, which is a container of teaching or information, is a being, So the being, it has its own way of spreading. Or, remember the Dalai Lama said when asked, are you not so angry with the Chinese for what happened to your country and your culture? And he said, yes, of course, in some ways this was tragic and there's a lot of pain involved in it for him. But he said the vidya of Tibetan Buddhism was something that we were holding on to, and we were holding it like we have this secret. We have this beautiful secret of the way that we've explored Buddhism since 1200 or whatever it was, when they had their Reformation. And the fact that we all had to take refuge in other places around the world meant that it spread. And he said, I quickly realized that the vidya of the Buddhism that we were trying to hang on to needed desperately to reach out into the world. And so actually it was the karma that the boundaries or the borders had to be broken of this esoteric and secret tradition. And sometimes I think, because I'm also like, wow, what's going on with breathwork right now? It's crazy. But but also it's a little bit beautiful that somehow people are very interested in their nervous system and the relationship of their breath to their mind. and their vagus nerve and their parasympathetic nervous system and their gut and how their digestive system is affecting their mind. And so it's beautiful, even though it's a mild chaos of offerings out there right now. It's actually also very beautiful that somehow it's up into the field of people's interest.
Yeah.
I think. I
Yeah.
think so.
No,
Yeah.
totally. I mean, and it's so powerful. I mean,
Yeah.
the reason, like you said, the reason why I think it is of such like, exploding into popularity right now is because it is so powerful and you can
Mm-hmm.
feel the results, especially if you practice regularly pranayama, you start to feel the effects
Yeah, it's
like
incredible.
immediately. I mean,
Yes.
even
Yeah,
just
yeah.
doing one breathwork practice, Nadi Shodhana, you do that for 10
Yeah.
minutes, 10 rounds, you
Mm-hmm.
feel so good after. You feel like the sweetness come back into your body, and that helps you in your life. And so I think it's something we desperately need as a culture and a society right now, with maybe even as a counterbalance to the intensity of
Mm-hmm.
how much is coming at us all the time in
Yeah.
different ways, online, in our societies, in our cultures, in our
Mm-hmm.
families. It feels like on the one hand, time is speeding up
Yeah.
so fast. And like this aspect of pranayama, we could talk a little bit about the difference maybe between pranayama and breathwork, but even just paying attention to your breath and learning very simple techniques to slow your breathing down, to bring the mind into that alignment with the breath, helps to slow things down. It helps to like kind of counterbalance the intensity of speed happening at this side.
Yeah.
It's like, wait a second, but you can also do this and find some kind of balance in the middle.
Yeah. You know what's interesting also is that, I mean, it was interesting that the COVID crisis was a respiratory issue, right? So
Yeah.
it's right. But it's also, when you
Yeah.
think of the respiratory issue, it's pranavayu, right? I mean, pranavayu is the receiving channels and the sense organs.
Mm-hmm.
So here we are in a time where the people's sense organs are inundated,
Mm-hmm.
inundated to the point of absolute exhaustion. And so a practice of breath is really, although the apana is extremely important,
Mm-hmm.
the pranavayu, how do we breathe? How do we take in
Mm-hmm.
what's around us is such a
Mm-hmm.
metaphor for the malaise, or for what we're suffering from in our culture,
Yeah, this
which
is
is
the
which is
zeitgeist of the
pranavayu.
era.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
moment. So it's natural that somehow prana is the prana
Yeah.
pranayama, or breath work, or however you want to call it, is somehow the antidote to that a bit. It's like it's dealing
Mm.
with what are we receiving? What are we doing with what we're receiving?
Yeah.
Can we
Yeah.
calm that down, and can we influence the input channels?
Yeah. Yeah. And like you say,
It's
it's a direct way to like do pratyahara, which is this
yes,
withdrawal of the senses, which is
yeah,
exactly the remedy we need to,
yep,
ease our
hmm,
suffering.
just fully.
What have you noticed as far as like pranayama, the way that you and I learned and kind of grew up in the yoga tradition, and then what's being offered now, and everyone seems to be a breathwork facilitator. Maybe not everyone, but a lot of people
A
outside of
lot.
the yoga world, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, may or may not have practiced yoga a day in their life, are now like offering breathwork teacher trainings, certifications,
Mm-hmm.
doing a lot of different types of breathing exercises. Have you like investigated this or noticed anything with this trend?
I have some big thoughts on that. I would start with this, and maybe you can give me your feedback as well.
Yeah.
I think that my experience before this whole phenomenon happened is that most people's experience with pranayama
Mm.
was done too aggressively, too intensively, and
Mm-hmm.
far beyond the nervous system capacity of the student who was being taught. And often the pranayama was being taught, follow my breath, like, so the whole group would try to breathe. I mean, how can you do that? I mean, you'll catch 20% will match your breath and the other 80% or you're going to be higher or lower. So, but that's a little side note. The point, I think, is that a lot of people's experience with pranayama was perhaps negative, because unlike what we learned with Tawari, which was really a very slow and gradual and smart, intelligent way of slowly building the apana, finding ground so you didn't fly through the roof. It wasn't a massive upheaval of the channels upwards. I mean, even just get the fingers down and get your bind down.
Yeah.
So I think many people experienced pranayama and they were like, well, that's not good. It doesn't work for me. I mean, I hear this. I have had a lot of students come and do trainings with me and they say, I just did not have a good relationship to this work before because it was taught too strong, too hard, too fast. Kapalabhati is taught like some sort of crazy breath of fire with not proper technique, and then people don't have a good experience. So it's a long way of answering your question, I think, is that because I don't think it was taught so well, and it's a bold statement to make, but I think it wasn't taught so well generally, or misinformed. Then when people came to this recent trend, which is just lie down on your back and breathe deeply, it was refreshing and was doable. It's a different thing altogether. The spine is not vertical. It's not sort of working with the nadis and the channels, and misses many, many things that are part of pranayama. But I can see the appeal. And I could see why suddenly people thought, just let me lie on my back, I'm exhausted, and let me breathe deeply. And the second thing is that, and maybe you can give me your feedback on this, but I think that coming out of the COVID era, and also just the way our culture has just separated us from ritual and separated us from community, is such an individual focus, that something like pranayama is very much a deep individual experience, And I think a lot of people are craving to go to a cacao ceremony or to go to a breathwork ceremony where there's some big gongs and there's something which has ojas and it feels sweet to them and it feels like they can gather with other people. Maybe I'm wrong, but I just feel like that's attractive at this time because people are craving togetherness and sound and sweetness on their tongue and being together. And so these kind of phenomena, they really take off, and the entry point's a bit easier. Pranayama is a more difficult journey. Would you agree? I mean, it's you're right. You can do a few rounds of Nadi Shodhana and feel a big effect, but to do a pranayama practice, really, it's like your Ashtanga practice or Mayasana. It takes some years of dedication.
Yeah, and it takes a lot of time commitment.
It takes
too,
a lot of
right?
time, yeah. And so it's
People
not
are
a
like,
quick
can't
hit.
you just breathe for 20 minutes? And I'm like, well, you can at first, but I mean, for me, my whole pranayama practice, if I'm doing the pranayama practice, it takes like 45 to 60 minutes.
Yep.
It's like a whole practice all by itself.
Yeah, it's a whole practice. It's full. So it's a big investment, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe we could summarize it like that. I think, a proper pranayama practice is an unbelievable gift for life. I mean, people who do it, they realize, wow, it's something they can carry with them anywhere, and they have it. And when they put in the first few years, it's deep in the channels, and they have that, But it's an investment, and the entry point to some of this other work is a little bit easier, and that's also beautiful, but it's different. It's different.
Yeah. One interesting thing, and I don't know if I've talked about this on the podcast before, but I've talked about it in my pranayama classes, is like there's some breath techniques like the 3-part breathing or holotropic breathing that's like fast breathing.
Mm-hmm.
Or
Yep.
and in and
Yep.
out through the mouth, which is very different from pranayama, which is using the nostrils, which is like tuning
Mm-hmm.
into the nadis and the movement of energy in a very subtle way.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
one interesting thing that I learned actually from the breathing diabetic, he was showing brain scans, and with fast breathing, it shuts off your prefrontal cortex.
Mm-hmm.
And with long, slow breathing, it increases the connectivity in the prefrontal
Mm-hmm.
cortex,
Mm-hmm.
and the whole brain, actually. And
Mm-hmm.
so it was fascinating because I was also learning, like with holotropic breathing or this 3-part breathing, what it does is it creates a state of hypoxia in the body. So you're like depriving
Mm-hmm.
your body of carbon dioxide, increasing the
Mm-hmm.
oxygen in your blood, which actually limits the amount of exchange that's happening between like your muscles start being
Yes.
deprived of oxygen in a way because there's no carbon dioxide to
To carry
exchange.
it. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. The
And
O2 binds to the hemoglobin. Yeah.
yeah, so
Yeah.
then you're like hyperoxygenating your blood, decreasing the thinking, or like the, over planning, overthinking, like the anxiety
Mm-hmm.
in a way in the brain. Plus you're listening to kind of emotive music. And so it's
Mm-hmm.
sending all the blood into your brain stem,
Mm-hmm.
and into your amygdala and into your, areas of emotion. And so it can kind of be used. I mean, what it was sort of for is to induce states. They would do it for really long periods of time, like an hour, 90
Mm-hmm.
minutes. And it would be to, have kind of an outer body experience where you're
Mm-hmm.
releasing unconscious trauma and things in the body.
Yep.
And
Yes.
I think it's very interesting as sort of an intervention,
Yep.
right? Where you're having this very different experience in your body on a somatic level. You can release a lot of unconscious things like emotions and pain, almost like, a yoga practice, like a really good yoga practice where, you have like some stuff coming up and
Yep.
out. But it's not really something you're going to do every day because it's not necessarily promoting like that stability in your nervous system. It's actually a little bit destabilizing, or could be potentially destabilizing, which is allowing the release to happen.
Yeah. I think it's beautiful how you just described it. I mean, it's disassociative a little bit. It's a little
Yeah,
bit disembodied, whereas pranayama is embodied. It's you're climbing
100%.
in. You're climbing in. And I remember once, about 6 years ago, I taught a class, and at the very end of the class, I did a little bit of Wim Hof breath.
Yeah.
And one of the students
Yeah,
came up, and
similar.
she said, "Why did you do that?" And I must confess, I was a bit experimenting, and I wanted to see a
Yeah.
bit these effects. And she said that I was so embodied, I was so deeply embodied, and that experience is so disembodying. Not that it's wrong,
Yeah,
but it has a different purpose entirely, right? It's not
totally.
really strengthening the nervous system in terms of its calm, stable
Yeah.
force. And
Yeah.
yeah, so this is a hallmark difference, I think, between these two things. I think that holotropic breath is very useful in that context. Yeah.
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 Yeah. And I do think there's something in our culture or society right now too, where people are, I mean, maybe this is always a human tendency and maybe there's just more opportunity for it right now, but like we want to have an experience and we're
Yes.
seeking, it's almost like more stimulation to the nervous system. I mean, when you take
Yes.
ayahuasca or like get high or have like this disembodied experience, I mean, it's an
Hmm.
experience, right? It's
Yeah.
like an isolated kind of like little bubble where you're having a different experience than your regular everyday
Yeah.
experience. And so, um, I
Yeah. We
think there
seek
is
that.
something to that. We're
Yeah.
seeking it. And
Yeah.
maybe we always have been, but I don't know.
I think we always have been. Yeah. But you know
Yeah.
what what Frawley says, which is interesting. I think about that a lot now. Is those kind of experiences, which are these peak experiences,
Yeah.
they open the channel very, very wide. And this
Mm.
feels a high, or it feels very alive, or it allows me to climb out of myself for a moment. But it's really pushing a lot through the channel in a short period of time. And that can be useful as a ceremony, or as from a time to time, to have that door of perception, or to step away from, or to release something.
Yeah.
But his view from the Ayurvedic perspective is when the channel opens that wide, it has to narrow down after. That's the way nature will work. So it will collapse a lot afterwards. And you can't rely on that as your baseline health practice, because it will just create too much of this and then this. And then when this gets thin again, you have to really go, you have the feeling, I need to get back up to thick.
Yeah.
Whereas a practice like pranayama is slowly, it's less exciting, but it's slowly building the capacity of the channel without so much rebound. So it's like a slow build of anchor and stability and brightness in the nervous system. And then actually the long practice of pranayama enables you to have a better experience when you go into the deep.
Yeah, because you can hold it and it doesn't collapse so much.
Yeah, and the anchor is there. There's not such a big collapse afterwards. And so I think it actually supports the ritual experience, or the deep ceremony, or the deep, wide opening, which, as you said, you can't do that every day.
Yeah, and it is fascinating too that, like, I love this idea of like this opening, because I think we've all had that experience, I mean, depending on if you've taken any kind of like, substances, drugs, or, you could even use alcohol as an example, right? There's sort of like an opening, a little bit of maybe a euphoria, right? And then the next day there's a collapse and like a, inflammation, depression. So, but it's the same, exactly what you're explaining. It's the same kind of expansion, contraction, which is the cycle of nature. Whereas the pranayama is just like patient, consistent growth in an expansive way. Yeah. And so, it's less like intense, but it's more stabilizing and ultimately satisfying, and ultimately you're expanding the capacity over time to hold for greater and greater energy, or to be able to deal with more stress on the nervous system, because stress is both good and bad. Right. And so we're creating these experiences by stressing our nervous system out. And then we have, whether it's a euphoric experience or a nightmare experience, it's a response to this stress. Whereas when you're able to hold that experience of stress in a more balanced and stable way, then it isn't as dysregulating afterwards.
Even,
I think.
I agree. Even to think, like, if you think about what this concept of vagal tone would mean, it would mean that after the stress, it's easy to come back to the steady state again, because you were going to be in stress. So, but the problem is, people either they get, they get caught in the stress and they cannot get out of it, or it's just all the way under, full collapse. And this is for sure such a beauty of these kind of kriyas and pranayamas, which are to build almost the fortitude in the system that allows the bounce back and the steadiness. And I find it beautiful that way. I often thought, if you want to say it from the perspective of drugs, it's like if I want to get there, the drug takes me there very fast, but then I didn't walk the path myself, and I bounce all the way back, and I can't find the path through the forest because the drug took me to the other side. But if I forge the path a bit myself, then it's my own freedom. I have that within me. And I noticed, Harmony, like, what I really noticed is it used to take me 40 minutes to really like hit this point in the pranayama where I felt like, wow, that's amazing right now. And I think with something like an external thing, like a drug or an external stimulation that helps us, we need more and more of that external thing to give us what we initially got. Whereas meditation and pranayama, it's almost inverted, because now I find
Yeah.
if I just, maybe Henry didn't sleep well and then forget it, but if I'm in a relatively good state and I do just 6 or 7 minutes, I'm like, oh, there it is. There it is.
Yeah.
It actually, the investment of that time allows a gift, which is quicker access. Does that make sense in a way?
Yes.
It's like, then
100%.
it's
It
not
makes
taking me
complete
40
sense to me.
minutes. Then it's
Yeah.
5 minutes. And then I'm like, oh, there I am. Boom. And this is the
Yeah.
gift of the
Yeah.
commitment to that. I heard a guy saying, if I told you to build a house for yourself, just do that. It would take a lot of energy and a lot of effort to build that house. You'd have to learn a
Yeah.
lot of things. You'd have to put a lot of big lifting into doing that. It would probably take you 2 years, realistically, to
Yeah.
build your own home. If you lived in that home and passed it on to your children, that would be an incredible investment, because this 2 years of heavy lifting resulted in 50 years of living. This is a sustainable way to live. But he said, if you put so much effort into building that house, it's a bit like similar to the well analogy.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're also, in our culture, we're jumping around so much, so that if you told me you're going to build a house for 2 years and did all that work and heavy lifting, and then you just lived in it for a year or two, or you didn't live in it, this is not sustainable. It's not a sustainable way to live, because you're constantly just outputting massive amounts of energy and not then residing in it.
Yeah.
Goes all the way back to your whole practice idea,
Yeah.
right? And it just hit me so beautifully when he said that. He was talking about business, how hard it is to build a business. The first few years are just heavy, heavy lifting. But you want to think like, long, I want to do this, because then in 10 years, there's these structures and this momentum and this entity which I can live in. And yes, I still maintain it, but
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
I find the meditation, the pranayama, our yoga practice can be like that.
Yeah.
If we're willing to
Yeah.
invest like that, then we have something that's like in us. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm always just so grateful for that time, that cocoon, of being in India and intense practice, and Thailand, and just going really deep, and really having my entire reality just be about like yoga practice, teaching, studying, like everything. There was nothing really outside of that for a good, solid 7 years. And I think that time has definitely paid off dividends, as far as being able, like you say, to kind of build, like at least kind of excavate the path.
Yes.
And then you can continue for every time you travel down it, it gets more wear and more,
Yes. Yeah,
easier to find. But
Yeah.
at the beginning, you really do need to kind of have a strong intention, like strong determination to really stick to it. Because I think that's the other thing, is we get caught up in the external and in the external experience, right? Or these peak experiences. And we think,
Yes.
I'll be
That's
happy when
Yeah.
I'll be happy with this
Yeah,
new
yeah.
thing or that new thing, and then
Yeah.
you just end up with a bunch of practices or postures that you don't have time to even do. And you forget the whole reason why you wanted them in the first place was to have that inner experience of wholeness, or
Yeah.
essence, or peace, or however you want to describe it. And so then it's almost like, okay, well, what's the most important practice, or what's the most important method or path or teaching for me to really be able to get home?
Yeah.
Home being that
That's a nice way to
space
say it.
inside yourself, right?
Yeah.
Like there's lots of ways you can travel there. There's lots of, paths you can take to get there. But like fucking get there,
Yeah.
you know?
Or get on one of those paths and just,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
Also,
like
there's
at
so
least
much,
follow it to the home so you
yeah,
know where home is.
yeah. You
Don't stay
remember,
lost in the forest, damn it.
totally. When I went with Patrick to Tibet, we did the Kora around Kailash and a long time ago, 2007.
Amazing.
And there's a path, right? But
Yeah.
that's also something so beautiful about a path or pathing or being on a path is this
Yeah.
this sense that others have been on it too. And
Yeah.
I remember it was such an effort to get there. I mean, that's a good metaphor. It was just such an effort to
Yeah.
get there, to get to this place. And then I stepped on to it, and I mean, really no kidding, I just began to weep. I just began to cry. And I was like, what's going on? I
Yeah.
mean, maybe part of it was just, it was such an effort to get there, but it was also just being on a path that people have walked for thousands of years praying.
Oh,
This has such a power. It's so beautiful. And somehow this is also such a beautiful part of this work that we share, is like climbing onto these paths and being with others. When I practice, still, I swear, every time I sit down, I still think of that beautiful old man Tawari and sitting there in Paul's Shala, and he's here, and then his teacher, and they're all there, like, and this just softens my ego, and it just let it come through me, and it's such a nice feeling, and I feel so grateful for that, and maybe that circles us back to this idea of what's the point of tradition and a pathway.
yeah. Yeah. I think also what you're speaking to and what's so beautiful about that is the support, right?
Hmm.
Because
Full
like you
support,
say,
yeah.
the energy of all these, beings, all these great teachers and masters and people who have
Hmm.
established the path before you
Hmm.
is coming and holding you on that path. And I think that is the beautiful thing about really having a tradition and
Yeah.
having a lineage or having teachings that come from a line of teachers is really the support, the nourishment that comes from that, especially when it's been healthy nourishment and positive nourishment. And
Yeah. And
you
also
feel it. You feel
the
this isn't
yeah,
mine. This is
yeah,
I'm just carrying this. I'm just carrying this now, and someone
yeah.
else is going to carry it, and it becomes easier then also to pass it on too, right?
Both, yeah. And I mean, yes, I mean, you're not alone. That's really beautiful. That's what brings the tears, actually, and makes you feel
Yeah.
so soft that
Yeah.
you don't carry it alone. And
Yeah.
also, I think, like when I stepped onto the path in Kailash, I was not just stepping onto the path of great teachers or teachings, but also humble Tibetan women that
Yeah.
have spent their whole life to get there and walked and prostrated that whole thing just as humble human beings praying
Mm.
for their family. And so you step into the thread of that energy, this
Yeah.
positive thread of this energy of love. And
Mm.
from just simple beings, that's why the Sangha or the Kula is just so important.
Yeah.
And you swept up in that. It's
Ugh.
magical. You're not alone at all. Yeah. So,
Yeah, yeah, and then it's exactly. I love this. Is just like I'm just riffing on everything you're
mhm.
saying, but then you're not just. It's not just the lineage. It's not just the teachers that have
Yes.
supported you, but now you're like, you feel this interconnection. Now it's like I'm
The
actually like
people and yeah.
supported by all
Yes.
things, by
Yes.
by the
Yes.
path itself, by the
By the path.
trees, by the women,
Yeah.
by the and then I mean, and isn't that the yoga to like
Yeah.
you get like such relief from the ego, which is so painful and
Yeah.
depriving at times,
Mhm.
I mean, it just creates so much suffering for us and yet
Yeah.
totally necessary for our lives. But it's like taking a drink of water when you can like expand yourself into that space of interconnectedness and feel support. And all of a sudden it's not you. It's just like there's nothing. There's no you. You're just like a part
Yeah.
of a bigger whole. And that's like the yoga. And it's a
Yeah.
beautiful space to enter into.
One of my
But like,
friends who is a student and wonderful teacher and philosopher, and I was talking to her recently, and I was sort of talking about the path and me on the path, and she was really criticizing me, and it a little bit hit me. There's a certain truth. She's like, you are not on the path. It's pathing. It's just pathing. It's the path. It's a verb, not a noun. And I thought, oh yeah, maybe you're right. So, but this idea, like what you said, you're stepping into pathing, and all that
yeah.
is with that, the trees and the ground and the great teachers and the people who've fallen down on that path. And that's you're right. It just dissolves the sense of me alone trying to figure it out. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh
Mm-hmm.
God, that's a
Mm-hmm.
heavy burden trying to figure it all
Yeah.
out. Right?
Speaking of figuring it out, I have to figure out dinner for Henry,
Yes.
and there's somebody
Thank
coming
you.
to teach in my cave, and so we could go on and on, but
Yes.
I think I
Beautiful.
have to wrap it
So
up there.
tell everyone where they can find you now that
Um,
you've moved into your cave.
yeah. I have a studio called Svarupa. Svarupa, the sense of one's
Self
essential nature.
form.
Yeah, form. Yeah, essential form. Svarupa. So I have a website, svarupa.com, and Stephen.svarupa is my Instagram handle. And yeah, my wife and I are based here in Bern. She's studying Ayurveda and teaching wonderful yoga. And I teach in Bern and Zurich, and I teach a little bit online, and all of that can be found through the website. And when the
Beautiful.
karma leads someone, it will lead someone.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Beautiful.
Thanks, Harmony.
Well,
Amazing to
thank you so
chat.
much for being here. Yeah.
Yeah, we
It's
used to
wonderful.
talk. We used to talk so long, and now I remember why. And it's just really nice to chat with you and
Yeah.
to see your smile and hear your
Yeah.
insight. Thank you. It's amazing.
Thank you. Well, that was really informative, and I hope that you feel inspired to deepen your pranayama practice and learn how to reduce your sense of overwhelm or anxiety, to regulate your nervous system, to release trauma, to reset your mind, body, your spirit, and increase your energy. And I have a really, really special offer for you. It is free, and you can learn how to immediately reduce overwhelm and anxiety in under 2 minutes, and you can get instant access right now. It costs nothing, and it will create more focus and more clarity in your daily life. So head on over to my website, harmonyslater.com. Just scroll down a tiny bit and learn how to reduce overwhelm in 2 minutes. Get it right now. It is my free breathwork practice for stress reduction, and you just have to download it. It's 2 minutes of conscious breathing that will increase your mental focus, uplift your mood, and it will increase your efficiency as well throughout the day. So you can use it first thing in the morning, you can use it in the middle of the day, you could use it at night. Whenever you do this practice, this 2 minutes of conscious breathing, it will help to reset and rebalance your mind and your body. I cannot wait to hear how it changes your life and your experience. So drop me a message. If you download it and use it, let me know how it's going. Let me know how it has affected your experience in your day-to-day life. I would love to connect with you and learn more. You can reach out to me personally on Instagram at Harmony Slater Official and drop me a note. Let me know how you like this free breathwork practice. That's it. We've concluded another episode of the Finding Harmony podcast. I just want to thank you so much for doing the work that changes the world, starting with yourself. It truly does make a huge difference. Please make sure you have your automatic downloads turned on wherever you listen so you don't miss any of the upcoming episodes. I have so much more magic I can't wait to share with you. Lastly, if you're on Instagram, I love connecting and hearing from you. So come on over and say hello at Finding Harmony Podcast. And you can also come say hello to me personally at Harmony Slater Official. Thank you again for being here. I cannot wait to share more with you in our next episode.